While exploring abandoned mines in the Jicarilla Mountains, I came across an old town of Jicarilla. I soon found myself researching any information I could about the old town and its residents. I stumbled across a story about one of the last miners in that area that intrigued me so much, I decided to share this almost forgotten piece of history with you. Here is the true story of Gerald Edward Jerry Fennell, the last miner of Jicarilla. The following story was pieced together from news articles and blogs online, including one of Jerry's last blogs. Jerry grew up in Vernon, Texas, on a ranch. Jerry put himself through high school in El Cajon, California, by working on a dairy farm. He worked cattle ranches, rode bulls and rodeos for 9 years, and then went to the Army stationed in White Sands, New Mexico. And this is where Jerry's story really began. In 1960, while he was in the Army, he met a man by the name of John Prather, who owned a ranch south of Alamogordo, New Mexico. John treated Jerry like a son, even though Jerry was a part of the Army. The ironic thing was, the government was trying to take John's land to extend the bombing range. Jerry remembers the words that John said that burned in his mind forever. He said, "I fought the Indians for this land, and there ain't no government gonna take it from me." Old John died, and the government did not take his land while he was alive. Jerry loved the outdoors and remembered the time he spent with his uncle, Jess, prospecting in Lincoln County, New Mexico. He made his way back up to the hills once again when he rounded a bend, and there stood an old building and a few houses. He said, "A feeling came over me that is hard to explain. It was like going home." He stopped and had a cup of coffee with a man named Charlie that told him about gold mining and showed him how to pan. After the Army, Jerry stayed in Jicarilla and never returned to California. Jerry found there was a need for someone who could fix the mining machines and make parts for them, so he headed up to Connecticut to a school that made him a machinist. Returned again to Jicarilla and wanted to learn more to further the miners' careers. After 2 years in Colorado Springs, working for Denver Equipment Company, working on mining equipment, he returned to Jicarilla once more, but this time, something had changed. Many of the old-timers had moved out, or just left. The ones who were left didn't really want to talk about why the others had left. It sure wasn't because the gold had run out. There were still lots of gold, so he knew something was not right. Then one day an old man handed Jerry an old, tattered and torn, well-used book on the mining laws. He said, "One day you'll need this." Shortly after that, the old miner was found dead in his cabin. He had broken his hip, had no firewood in for the night, and he froze to death. Jerry lived a simple life on his isolated mining claim, one of several he had owned since 1993. Chickens, kept for their eggs, roamed freely about the property. Inside his cramped living room/bedroom, which was heated by a wood stove, a couple of car batteries were rigged to operate his phone. Out back, the generator was cranked up to power lights and his computer. A deer head and various antlers were mounted on the living room walls. He hauled his water via truck from a well down the road. He kept a goat for milk and pigs for meat. A mule helped him haul the dirt from a nearby wash that he sifts in search of gold dust. Jerry did not say how much he made from his low-tech operation, which used virtually no water and no earth movers. But he noted that selling gold sustained him for decades. Jerry's operation was small by design and philosophy. He said,
I keep it that way because I don't want to disturb the land more than I have to. I just take enough gold to get by. I don't use any chemicals and darn little water.
There is no natural source of water nearby, so Jerry had to haul in all he used with an aging pickup truck. Those days of just getting by soon were over for Jerry if the U.S. Forest Service had its way. According to Jerry, he received a letter from the Lincoln National Forest Office saying he would be charged with trespass unless he filed paperwork that Jerry said would put him out of business. If he filed the paper, a plan of operation, the Forest Service would impose such a huge reclamation bond that he wouldn't be able to afford it. He watched them do it to his neighbors. They are all gone now. He was the last miner in the Jicarilla Mountains. Buildings that were formerly the store, post office, schoolhouse, and church remain. Jerry's home is the old general store. The congregation of the Jicarilla Mountain Community Church used the old schoolhouse as a chapel until the U.S. Forest Service padlocked it. In May 2001, Jerry and several others who have mining claims in the area established the Jicarilla Mining District Commission to govern their claims. In March 2002, a few days before Easter, Forest Service officials slapped a padlock on the old schoolhouse, which Jerry and others had used as the Jicarilla Mountain Community Church. The Forest Service also attached a yellow sign stating that the church's property of the United States warned against trespass and threatened anyone who damaged the building with a $500 fine, and posted a sign reading, "All persons are prohibited under penalty of the law from committing any trespass." He produced an envelope stuffed with well-thumbed documents he has gathered over the past few years.
Hey, look at this,
He said as he showed a record from the pile.
This building has been used as a church since the 1930s. How can the Forest Service just padlock it and post it?
He said he repeatedly asked the Forest Service to prove they even own the land on which his claim is located. All they provided was a copy of an executive order signed by President Woodrow Wilson that indicated certain lands must be taken to connect the Lincoln National Forest to another national forest. As best as he could determine through his research, the land may not even belong to the Forest Service. Indeed, the title trail is incredibly convoluted. In addition to ownership by Spain, Mexico, and the Republic of Texas, Jicarilla has been a part of 3 New Mexico counties over the past 100 years as political borders were shifted. The Lincoln County Tax Assessor's Office stated, "There is really no way to know where all the records for Jicarilla are located." Jerry's troubles began to attract public attention in Lincoln County, an area that has seen much of its history bulldozed by federal land agencies. Publisher Ruth Hammond and reporter Doris Cherry of the Lincoln County News believe Jicarilla needs to be saved and that the Forest Service has destroyed too many of historic buildings. Many residents have family who worked and are buried there. The Forest Service said that they did not dispute Jerry's right to work his mining claim, but the Forest Service maintained that miners are generally not allowed to live full-time in a national forest. Miners are expected to live outside of the forest and commute to their claims. More basic than that, Jerry said that the Forest Service has no say over his mining claim. The main point of contention is a 1907 law signed by President Theodore Roosevelt that expanded the boundaries of the Lincoln National Forest to include the Jicarilla Mountains. The Forest Service jurisdiction was enhanced by a 1955 Act of Congress that said mining claims only provide miners mineral rights, not surface rights, that include trees, grazing areas, or residences. But Jerry said the 1907 Act specifically exempted areas such as the Jicarilla Township from the Lincoln National Forest. Thus, he argued, The Forest Service does not have jurisdiction over the Jicarilla area. Ranger Gerald Hawks sent Jerry a notice giving him 90 days to remove his personal property from the mining claim and, quote, without further changing the historic structures.
I'm fighting for the town,
Jerry said.
Preserving it is living it, occupying it, painting it.
He said that Forest Service officials once arrived at Jicarilla with 2 fire trucks in tow, announcing their plans to burn down the old schoolhouse and general store where he lived. The Forest Service in the past burned or demolished more than a dozen homes vacated by former miners. Jerry sits glumly on the steps of the Jicarilla Mountain Community Church.
For years I've watched and cared for this building and others. If the Forest Service pushes me out, in a couple of weeks, what is left of this little village will be vandalized or bulldozed and burned by the feds.
He paused and looked sadly over what has been his home for decades, clears his throat and says quietly,
You know, it ain't the gold that has me reared up and fighting back. It's the saving of this place for our kids and grandkids. I'd hate to see it destroyed.
Jerry was born April 9th, 1941. He passed away January 6th, 2014. He was cremated and his ashes were spread in the Jicarilla Mountains, which was his wish.